Hey, Kim. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, 1 second. Turn my volume up. All right. So I know a lot of people are busy tonight. There's a lot going on, and some are out at camp. So they will be interacting through the recording after. So if there's only a few people on tonight, don't worry. They did communicate saying that they wouldn't be here.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm just out getting ice cream with my girls. So awesome. I'm going to mute, and it will be recording, and it's your show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. So we'll add about another minute or so, Hannah. I see you, and then I'll start on the feet, the orthotics, and the running shoes.
Okay.
Okay, so tonight I'm going to go over a bit of information that might be a little non-traditional to give to athletes of your ages. I'm going to talk about the feet. I'm going to talk about what the expectation of a basketball player, or the expectations from a basketball player, are regarding their feet, because believe it or not, it's an incredibly important part of your body for basketball, as it is with a lot of sports, but we have an expectation out of our feet that we don't even realize we have. And I want to explain a little bit about that to you guys today. We're going to talk about orthotics. I'm going to talk about shoes. I have some to show you. So the differences in some of the footwear, which I touched on in another segment, but we're going to go over mostly about court shoes. And then a little bit about typical injuries that happen to feet in basketball. So in terms of the anatomy of the foot, everybody knows we heel strike, and the foot is responsible for movement, and it's responsible for keeping us upright. And it's responsible for cushioning, absorbing forces. And you can imagine when I'm talking about those things in basketball, that they're highly important pieces to how quickly and how agile you will be on a court. So somebody who has foot pain, somebody who has a sore arch, or even a blister for that matter, it really delays the ability of that athlete to be able to move onto that foot and off of that foot. And basketball is one of those sports that is designed to have a certain shortness in time on your foot. You plant, the whole point is to plant sturdy and then be able to move depending on what direction that play is going to go into. So if we have a delay because of improper footwear, because of a pain, anything like that, then what happens is it's a delay in how you react and in your reaction time, and obviously a misplay. So the feet are flexible. Obviously we have 5 toes. We have a forefoot, which is the toes. We have a midfoot, which is where the arch is. I should have brought my bones from the clinic, but I forgot. And then a hind foot, which is the heel, or the calcaneus. Every part of the foot has a very, very, very important and integral part to movement. And when we land on our heel, and the heel bone is the biggest bone because it's designed to absorb force. Then we transfer the weight over our arch, which is where most people have pain. And it's because it's somewhat suspended in air. It's suspended by ligaments and connective tissue. And then we toe off onto our toes. And that's another place where obviously we have a lot of muscles that come in and connect from the shin. So as you jump, you know that you jump from your forefoot up. So that's why in basketball, if you look at the fact that you do running, you do jumping, you do abrupt stops and change in direction, your foot becomes a very, very, very integral part of your game. And I've always taught the foot to my basketball players, less so, let's say, to a skater or to a swimmer, because it doesn't provide as much importance, but it really does provide importance into a basketball player. And because the typical basketball player tend to be longer, not necessarily leaner, but longer, then that foot, if you look at laws of physics in terms of lever systems and obviously height, the further away you are from your feet, the more clumsy you are. So here's a fact: about 5 years ago, we did pre-testing for concussions with Laurentian men's basketball team. We did women's too, but we did Laurentian men's basketball team. And one of the pre-testing so that we could create a baseline was balance. And we did something called sway. So you hold your cell phone and we put the athlete in about 5 different stances and we check their body for sway, which obviously is poor balance. All but one person on the men's basketball team failed miserably on balance. And so you think, okay, well, does it matter much? It matters a lot because somebody who has poor balance, again, typically has a longer body. But the other thing in my basketball players is the average basketball player has a very high calf, so a very long shin. And if you look at somebody who maybe is more power, they'll have a much longer calf and a thicker calf. And that calf almost comes right down to the ankle. Well, the ankle is sturdier in somebody that has a longer calf. And somebody who has a very small and very high calf actually has a weaker, typically, ankle. And if you have a weaker ankle, we have obviously issues with the foot and its stability. So just to kind of give you an idea that that is one thing when my Sudbury 5 guys come and my Laurentian athletes come in, I always look at the anatomy of their lower leg and ankle. And that tells me what I'm going to be set up for in terms of probability of injuries. And that calf location and size is a big one because it relates to the foot. So again, we need to know, we need balance. Balance comes from the foot. So the other thing we look at in the foot, if you look at the arch, somebody who is a pronator or a supinator. So a pronator is the most common, and that's somebody who happens to have a fallen arch. And a supinator tends to be somebody who has a higher arch. So most common in basketball are flat-footed people. So not necessarily a pronator, because you're only a pronator if you had an arch and you're losing an arch. So a lot of basketball players, a lot of African-American males will have been born without an arch and they're just very, very flat. Well, that changes the mechanics and the biomechanics of the way the foot works and actually sets them up for different injuries. And then you have somebody who may have had an arch but starts to lose it, and that actually sets them up for a different series of injuries that I'll talk about. So knowing the foot in basketball, I believe, is an incredibly important piece of information when I'm dealing with athletes. Not something you guys need to know, but something you need to know that I'm looking for or your trainer should be looking for in terms of injuries. In the first year we had men's basketball during training camp, and Kyle was there. One of my athletes, Devin Gilligan, and you could tell within the first few minutes of watching him practice and try out that he was going to have something called tibialis posterior tendonitis. And sure enough, within 6 weeks, he had it, both legs. And it was because I was watching the way he was moving. I was watching how hard he hit the ground when he would stop and change direction, and how he was taking off. So I obviously looked at his lower leg and I thought, okay, we're gonna have shin splint type issues, and we did. So, but I was able to get ahead of that beforehand and tape it and correct it so that it was a much milder situation. Because if you get some of these significant injuries, you reduce the ability to take off and to land and obviously to run, which are 3 important things for basketball. So again, that's why I wanted to take a couple minutes tonight and talk about the foot and ankle. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about orthotics. Orthotics are a custom-made arch support that you put in your shoe. If you look at a basketball shoe and you look at the bottom, you know, and you look at all different sides, and you can look at your own basketball shoes, there's no arch in it. So this is very, very minimal of an arch. And if you look at the height, it gives you the illusion that there's an arch in here. But if you take the height and you bring it all the way to the forefoot, you realize there's no arch. It's just about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of foam protection. Now, if you look at my running shoe, for example, you can now see the arch and then it comes back down. So I know that in the running shoe, I have the cushion to land and I have arch supports. And if you are in a court shoe, You don't have an arch support because, believe it or not, having an arch in a court shoe absorbs time. It takes time away from your ability to land, to stick, and to move. So court shoes will always be very flat shoes. And the problem is when you're looking at the fact that I'm going to say the average or the majority of pro basketball players either have flat foot or fallen arches, and we put them in a shoe that has no support, we again run into the issue of muscle attachments, tendon attachments, obviously, and the lengthening and thus the injury of the tibialis posterior, the plantar fascia, and things like that. So it's not uncommon for a basketball player to have sore feet, especially because we typically have weaker ankles. And when you have weaker ankles, we have more movement. Again, flat feet, we have no shock absorbency. So it's more common to have micro traumas, micro tears, and injuries to the feet and ankle. So again, something that's definitely more common in basketball players, which is another reason why the high top was created, was to provide some ankle support to those higher calves, longer shin athletes, so that they didn't always have to be taped. So the high top, if you look at all sports, it's the only sport that has it. Every other sport will have a regular looking shoe. And then you go all the way down. So if you look at the evolution of the shoe, the high top in basketball, the regular height in a runner, and then you look at a sprinting shoe and it's bare. There's barely any height to the shoe at all. And again, because we need speed and turnover. You don't need to hit hard. You don't need to turn directions. You know, all those things are eliminated in a sprinter. So the shoe really dictates what's expected out of the foot and what's needed out of the foot and lower body. So an orthotic would be something we would put in the shoe for an athlete that we're seeing repetitive injuries to. Again, sore arches, maybe sore toes, especially the big toe, bruising on the heel from landing. So I'm not a big fan in an orthotic in kids because it definitely does change the way your foot is going to mature and the structures, how they're going to age with you as you grow. But in some cases we have no choice because it's just too sore. The arches are falling or have fallen, and there's just too many problems with the mechanics of the foot. And the other thing, obviously, as we creep up to up the leg, we have knee issues. So if we don't have an arch to absorb the force, and we don't have a footwear, so a shoe to absorb the force, and we have a really high calf, so again, we have no muscle tissue to absorb the force, then the next joint it's going to go to is the knee. And that's, you know, as we're growing, we get the patellofemoral, the chondromalacia, the jumper's knee, right? That's where, and reason why we see knee injuries in basketball. So ideally, if we could absorb the force in the foot where it's meant to be, we would have less force transmitting up the leg. But if you look at the mechanics necessary to move on a basketball court, we can't do that. So it's kind of one of those catch-22. So then again is why it's important for the trainer or the therapist for the teams to really know the anatomy of their players, and then to double back and check to make sure they're in the right footwear. So, you know, Nike makes a completely different shoe than Under Armour, which is a different shoe than Michael Jordan, and so on and so forth. So one thing we do, especially as athletic therapists, is we have a full course when we're in school all on shoes. And we basically are put in contact with regional managers on all types of footwear. So I would call them up. I have an athlete wearing such and such a shoe. I need to know how it's made, how it's designed, what it's for. Is it a sturdy shoe? Is it a wider shoe? Is it a shock absorbency shoe? And get an idea, if not, what line what can I put my athlete in for this certain injury? And that conversation and those conversations do exist, and they should exist. And what it does is it lowers the risk of injury, certainly reduces the amount of pain, but also improves your ability to move on a basketball court. So shoes and feet, incredibly important, and understanding that the mechanics are what make basketball. So swimming, sure, it's mechanics, but it's not something we would correct with a thing, right? There's not a footwear There's not a brace. You know, swimming is completely different. Whereas basketball, we need shock absorbency, and we can correct it with a proper shoe, an orthotic, a brace, a tape job. But we need to know, and preferably know ahead of time so we can prevent some of these issues and get you in the right footwear, get you on the right training, stretching, whatever it may be. So those are basically orthotics. Now, if anybody's in an orthotic, I would like to know. If anybody's questioning an orthotic, I would like to know. And the reason is because I want to make sure that you're getting put in one for the right reasons. If you go to a dentist, the dentist is going to check your teeth and give you a checkup or a bill of health on your teeth. If you go to a chiropodist to look at your feet, they're most likely going to put you in an orthotic because you're there to have your feet checked. So I never send somebody to a chiropodist just to see. I only send my athletes if my end result is an orthotic. That's what my goal is to put them in an orthotic. If I send them there, they're going to come back with an orthotic. And now $450 to $700 later, I may end up taking you out of them. So I prefer to see the feet, the footwear, and see if there's anything we can change, modify, improve before we go into something like an orthotic. The other reason is when you change the mechanics of your foot, you are changing everything all the way up the chain, all the way back, all the way up to your upper body for that matter. So we don't want to do a correction at the foot unless absolutely necessary, which means that there's a fault or a dysfunction or a malfunction of the foot that's causing a problem somewhere else up that chain. Then I have to put you in an orthotic. And then and only then would I put you in an orthotic. Now, adults, as we age, having low back pain, it's a common reason to get orthotics. Absorb the force a little bit, cushion it, those kinds of things. That's when it's necessary. But in my kids, I don't want to take that chance unless absolutely necessary. Okay? But if you guys have any questions about an orthotic, like you're already in one, do I still need one? I needed one when I was 7. I'm 12 now. Any of those questions about an orthotic, your body would have changed drastically. It changes almost every year. And in some kids, it's about 6 months. So you got to make sure that the orthotic fits your shoe size, and again, is still necessary. So those are orthotics. I want to go over the shoe component a little bit again. I had brought my running shoe before. So again, remember I told you that the toe box in a running shoe is lifted. Okay, it's lifted off the ground, and that propels me forward. So it actually gives me a little bit of a forward momentum so that when I'm running, I don't get stuck in the midfoot. I am forced over the forefoot. But in a basketball shoe, it's entirely different. They want you to stay here so that you are ready, basically, to change direction. It doesn't want you to go forward. It doesn't want to propel you this way because you may not be going forward. You may be going side to side or backwards. So if you have a shoe that has a toe box that's lifted, you're automatically going to be going into that forward motion, but then the ball might be coming, or you may have to backtrack or whatever the case may be, which means that you've lost time and you've probably missed the ball. So court shoes are designed entirely different. They have a flat midsole. They tend to be a little wider, and they're made flatter without, so if you look at mine, I have these little ridges and ledges, and that's to disperse force. But in a court shoe, we want you to stick. So the grooves won't be as deep. They're not going to be as fancy, and they're going to be much flatter. And that's so that you can get some stickiness, especially when there's water or anything or sweat on the court, you're less likely to go flying. And that's why a court shoe is designed entirely different than any other shoe. So if you're training to run, if you're training to walk, if you're training to lift, you can wear a different shoe. But when you're dribbling, when you're doing basketball drills and skills, it's incredibly important you're in a court shoe. The shoe is incredibly important for what you guys are doing and using it for. I would actually prefer a court shoe in the gym to a running shoe for the same thing. If you're doing squats and we want your pressure back on your heels, but in a running shoe, it tilts you forward. Now you run a risk of injuring your low back. So I prefer basketball drills and skills and anything that's body weighted lifted, obviously, to be in a court shoe. Running and walking should be in a running shoe. So if anybody doesn't have a court shoe, let me know. There are a few things you can modify to make sure that you're safe in a running shoe. But ideally, you will always, always, always do anything basketball related in a court shoe. And those are the reasons why. So just quickly going to go over some of the injuries in case some of you are feeling them right now. The big toe from toeing off. You can get either side of the foot. So the toe side in here, and that's usually from changing directions. The baby toe is obviously much smaller than the big toe, but you can get sprains and strains in toes just like you can in knees and elbows. Obviously the arch, especially when you're in the age group where, you know, you might now be rebounding, and which is jumping and landing, and you're growing. So you're stretching ligaments that are kind of already compromised, and you will possibly lower that arch and flatten that arch faster. And in doing so, cause some micro tearing of the plantar fascia. We can get bruises in the heels. We can get heel spurs, and you can get micro fractures and stress fractures up the shin, depending on, again, of the anatomy of your particular foot. So if anybody's having any foot pain at all, let me know. What I've been doing with the rest of you is I had you write an X or a circle on the part and sending me a picture. You can come and see me in the clinic. We're open, but you can do that too, just to start a conversation. I can kind of let you know what the anatomy of that structure is, the reason why perhaps, and give you some feedback on how to prevent it or to control it. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's the change of the shoe. In a running shoe, how we do runners is we would have them buy a shoe, wear it for 6 weeks to maybe 12 weeks, buy a new shoe, the same kind. The old shoe we now use for long runs. The new shoe we start for short runs. And then when you've been about 6 to 9 months on the old shoe, that becomes a workout shoe or a gardening shoe. The new shoe now goes into your old shoe and you purchase another one. Court shoes aren't too far off. They don't have to be quite so frequent because you're not putting the miles on. But if you find a shoe you like, you should buy two. And mainly because the scuffing wears down the pattern. So if any of you have seen those toothbrushes that have the blue indicator bristles in the middle, when you get halfway, what that tells you is that you're losing the value of the bristle. So it's either softening or you're losing them, right? So then what happens is when you're brushing your teeth, you're not brushing your teeth with the same type of bristle. And it's time to throw it out and get a new one. Well, that pattern in the bottom of your shoe isn't just for looks. There's a purpose to it. And especially in a running shoe, when the pattern starts to thin out or wear out, that tells me now that I'm starting to lose the integrity of the shoe. So if you're buying the shoe for the purpose of shock absorbency, then that information is important. So now you have a higher risk of injury. So it's time to put this one away and introduce another one. Court shoes are the same, even though they don't have the depth to the pattern. You can certainly start finding places where it starts to wear. And if you're starting to wear where it's flattening out, then it's time to introduce a new shoe. And you would do very similar. So if you're doing let's say a practice where there's a lot of scrimmaging and a lot of running up and down, you would use your old shoe. And if you have practices where you're just mostly dribbling and shooting, you would start introducing your new shoe. And you would kind of do that for a few weeks. And then again, your old shoe becomes garbage and you start introducing another pair. Because it's your only piece of protective equipment, it's as important as a helmet. It's as important as shoulder pads in hockey. It is the only thing protecting you from injury. If the shoe starts to wear and you're not paying attention to it, you will injure yourself. And you will heal, I have no doubt, but you've lost that time unnecessarily. So it's really important that everybody, when you're done tonight or tomorrow, go get your court shoes and look at them. Look at them and analyze them. And when you come in, no matter what your sport is, I take your shoe And I can tell almost everything about your body type by looking at the bottom of your shoe for a wear pattern. And it tells me if you're a spinner and you spin off your big toe. It'll tell me if you're compensating and you're going a little too far to the baby toe. So I can tell about what your problems are and how you're compensating by the wear pattern of your shoe. You guys need to learn that, because you're the only ones that can go to mom and dad or take money out of your account and go buy a pair of shoes. So if you're a brand new shoe, take a look and know what the shoe looks like. If you're midway through, you know, and you've had it for a couple months, take a look, because you'll be able to identify wear patterns. And if it's a really old shoe, you'll really be able to identify, and it might even be worn. The other thing you want to look at, and I spoke about it one day too, are smiles. So my running shoe is pretty new. I don't really have any, but in this area here, this white area, when the foam starts to condense from use, you will actually get these lines, these creases, and they're called smiles. That means that the cushion part of the shoe is gone entirely. And you want to do the same look in this area of your court shoe. Now, depending on how heavy of a heel striker and what kind of movement you do, a shoe will break down at different paces depending on that body type. But you want to look at the shoe. You want to know what's there, and you'll start to see these creases and these long cracks, almost like a foundation or let's say a drywall crack. Same thing that an engineer is going to say, oof, you know, something's moving in your house, something's cracking because your drywall has cracks in it. Same thing happens in the shoe. And you ask an engineer, they're going to tell you the integrity of the wall, maybe the foundation, the roof, whatever it is, there's a problem and something's going to get worse. Same thing with the shoe. So don't ignore the importance of shoes, because they are your only thing protecting you from injury. So make sure that you keep an eye on them, you know them inside and out, you know what they look like when you bought them, and it gives you an idea of when they should be replaced. I understand they're costly, but again, they're just as important as a helmet or pair of shoulder pads for injury prevention. And the best thing to do is to know the shoe. When you go to buy a shoe, don't buy the shoe for the color. I got pro guys that do that all the time to me, and they'll go and find out the coolest pair, and sure, they're cool, but they don't know if they're the right shoe for them. So you always want to go to whatever store, probably Sport Check around here, and talk to the guy or the girl and say, okay, I would like to know about my shoe. I really like these ones. You're going to try them on, you're going to walk in them, you're going to jump in them, and you might do a few little runs in them. But you need to know what that shoe was designed for, what kind of foot and what kind of protection. And there are different lasts, which means the bottom of the foot. You'll get some that have gel, you'll get some that have air pockets, you'll get some that are a little bit more rigid. Every single shoe is designed for a purpose and for a prevention of something. And you don't want to buy the wrong one, even though it might be really cool, because it actually might promote an injury, and then ignore the one you actually need to be preventing. So very, very important, because it's your piece of equipment. They are your feet, your knees, and you need to know for yourselves as athletes what that shoe is designed for and why. And if it's not something you need to be worrying about, and they should do a quick assessment of your feet. If you've got, your arches are fine, then you don't need one with support. If you have nice flexible feet, you might need a more rigid shoe. You need to know basically what that shoe is for, so that you can obviously decrease your injury and move better on the court. And again, it just adds to everything I've been speaking to since the beginning. You need to know about everything that has to do with your body and the changes that you're expecting out of it. Because if your feet are sore, if your mechanics of your feet aren't functioning, nothing else is going to get achieved, especially on the court. So it's up to you guys, and obviously your parents, but the more that I can teach you about your body and about your sport and about how things move, and more importantly, how things work together, then the better athlete you're going to be, and certainly the better educated of an athlete you're going to be. And if you, going back to Michael Jordan, he hired a guy, and I think I said this before, he paid him $3 million. And this guy did all his training, all his yoga, all his meals, traveled with him everywhere. And he was interviewed in his session on Netflix. And his job was to keep him injury-free and healthy. And someone asked Michael Jordan, why would you pay $3 million for a personal trainer / therapist? And he said, because I make $30 million a year. And if he gets me one more year playing basketball, he was worth $3 million. And that's what that's the thing you guys have to remember is you won't have that, but you don't need it. As long as you can learn, know your body, feel when your body is sore, going back to when Dr. Cam did an active recovery session with you guys, because his body was sore. Those are really important things. Know when you haven't slept. Know when you're hungry. Don't ignore a headache. You could be dehydrated, right? So writing those things down, throwing them to Kyle, to Dr. Cam, to myself, especially until you get used to knowing what those patterns are, throw them at us. We'll give you the answers. We'll give you the reasons, at least an explanation. And then you take that information back and it gives you your answers to why your body's behaving the way it is. And you'll get better at it. You'll get better at it. And when you hit university level and maybe even further than that, and it could be in anything, it doesn't have to be in basketball, but being able to know what your body is telling you and listening to it will make you go a lot further than the person who thinks, I'm just going to grunt and bear it, and I'm just going to work through this, and I'm just going to ignore it because I'm tough. You might be able to do it for a few years, sure. You'll be able to do it maybe into your 20s. But after that, you're going to have a hard time functioning in the real world as could be a bricklayer, could be a teacher, could be anything. But now's the time to create that platform and teach your body and learn from your body, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache, let me tell you. So if there's any questions on feet, shoes, footwear in particular, orthotics, and definitely any aches and pains you're having in the lower body, feel free to email me. You can get me through any of these chat rooms, obviously. And Dr. Cam's good too. He's a chiropractor, so he certainly knows his way around feet and knees. And if any of you would feel better, finding out about that, by all means, give him a call or shoot him an email. And between all of us, we can make sure that you guys are staying healthy, especially when we're doing things from driveways and not from gym floors. Things are a little different. We're going to absorb force a little less, and we're going to move a little differently. So if anybody has any questions, just shoot them now or send me an email. Okay, perfect. So have a great Tuesday, everyone. Have a great week, and I will see all of you next Tuesday. Enjoy the weather. Bye.